Would open up your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 31. 1 Samuel 31. Meet you there in just one moment. I want to say how thankful I was that the elders were obliged to have Joey Treat here this morning from GBN. Glad he's able to present that work and then preach for us. And I've known of GBN since its inception. Because the original studio is right down the road from my house, really, within a few miles. And so we were very familiar when they moved in. We helped them move. We did all kinds of things over there. And so I was very, very thankful that got started to begin with. And then ultimately that the work has grown and that we could have him here and discuss that work with us. One little discrepancy I wanted to make known here is that during the announcements, I was announcing Joey, and then Joey got up and said that you just don't know what's going to come out of my mouth, But he was thankful that it was good. And I was walking right back through here as that was being said, and Joey says, you just don't know what's going to come out of his mouth. And Ed Renty, just so I could hear it, says, "We know." It was too good to pass up. I had to let everybody know that. It was hilarious. I will not forgive you for that, though. So I do appreciate Ed. I've missed Ed while he's been gone. Glad he's back. Glad that we're all here tonight, and we're putting God first. Let's look at this last chapter. I know that if you were here Wednesday night, I'm chomping at the bit here, and I'm ready to get into 2 Samuel, but I'm going to be patient and wait for next week to come to get into 2 Samuel. But let's talk here about the fall of the house of Saul. That is what happens here in chapter 31. It's already been prophesied, so you know it's going to happen, and then the details just come out right here. So let's look at the first few verses. We're going to look at the death of Saul and his sons, verses 1 through 6. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers overtook him, and he was greatly distressed by reason of the archers. Now, I'm going to pause right here for just a second. This is something that you could probably imagine just about how stressful this would be, being, under the attack of archers. There were things that were greatly feared among people in those days when they were fighting in this way. Those on horseback were terrifying, and archers were terrifying. If you think about it, it's much like the sniper of today. An archer can stand back and shoot you from a distance and not even have to see you as you go down. And there's been some thoughts as to how far an archer would have to be in order to do this. And really, there's a pretty decent range that people would think would have been used. They show archers like 1,000 yards away in these movies and stuff. That's not true. But if you can imagine being shot from 200 or 300 yards away, that was possible. That was very possible with the various bows that were used at these times. Likely, the thought process was that to get a good shot off, you'd probably be within 150 to 200 yards. And so this is, they're pretty close. They're closing in on Saul. They're probably got him pinned down, and that's what's going on here. Verse 4. Then said Saul to his armor-bearer, "Draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith. Let these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took his sword and fell upon it. When his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he likewise fell upon his sword and died with him. So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men that same day together. And so the army is just gone. This is a sad day for a lot of people, obviously, because you think about the men that are represented in this have families, they have wives, they have children. Likely, many of them are in this position. And so this being a great battle where they die is going to really put a hurting on the children of Israel. But thinking about what is going on, Saul dies, but he dies in a pretty cowardly way. Now, I can't help but think, going back to about the middle of this book, and thinking about when you're in chapter 15, and Saul goes and he has fought against the Amalekites, and he's taken the king Agag. And why would you take a king? And we discussed this back then, but I want to reiterate this at this very point, because it is likely that Saul is afraid of the very thing he was likely going to do to Agag, and that is humiliate him. At the time of these kings, what they would do to other kings when they'd capture them, they would cut off their thumbs and they'd cut off their great toes so that they would be hobbling around. They would not give them sufficient clothing as to embarrass them further, and they would oftentimes beat them. They'd put them as a spectacle. They'd have a feast. They might chain up the king in front of everybody. You see something like this with Samson, a similar thought process. Of course, with Samson, they've gouged out his eyes. Now, thinking to a king, the limit was the imagination. You wanted to keep him alive. You just wanted to embarrass him. You want to torture him. You don't want to kill him. And so this is likely the thing that Saul was going to do. And because he knows in his mind that this is kind of a common practice, maybe even he has thoughts of what he would have done to Agag, and he's thinking, you know what, I don't want to be abused by these people. And so what does he do? He takes his own life. He actually asked for his armor-bearer to do it for him, and then when his armor-bearer refuses, he goes ahead and he falls on his own sword, and then the armor-bearer follows suit. And then we see the abuse. Now, they don't get to abuse Saul while he's alive, but they abuse his body after his death. Let's look at verses 7 through 11 here. It says, "And when the men of Israel that were on the other side of the valley, and they that were beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled. And the Philistines came and dwelt in them." So everybody, when they see all this bad stuff happening, they leave the cities. So the cities are now empty, and then the Philistines, then they just come in and set up shop. And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa, and they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent into the land of the Philistines round about to carry the tidings unto the house of their idols and to the people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard concerning him that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose. And we'll stop right there. So they, of course, this is the secondarily what you're going to do. Instead of being able to abuse him while he's alive and torture him, they now take his body. They take his armor. They make the armor. They place it in a temple, in a place with a false deity. Then they take his body. Of course, they cut off his head. They take his body. They strap it to a wall. They do all these things to really just show their complete dominance. There's it's kind of an interesting legend because you've all heard the name Dracula. Dracula it was a real person. And his name was Vlad the Impaler. And he was known for some things like this. He oftentimes would take people's bodies, and he would take them and stick them on pikes out in front of these places where he had fought or defeated them. There you might go and basically have a field of just bodies on pikes. And as disgusting as the thought is, this is the same kind of thought process, except they're just doing it to the king. They're just trying to humiliate the king, show their complete dominance of him. And so this is what they've done. They've abused his body after his death. Now, sometimes we think about this and we kind of take a step back and we go, well, what's the big deal here? Is this really a big deal? Yes, historically this has been a very big deal. Just think about it like this. If you were to die, sometimes people give their bodies over to science, right? You've heard of that before. And some people have just this horror about thinking about doing that. And why? Well, it's kind of personal. I know you're dead. But if you go and they put you in an operating room and people are looking at your deceased body, and they're studying your deceased body, it's kind of an embarrassing thought when you think about it. Now, if you were to just take that out of your mind and then place it onto what has happened to Saul, do you think that has exponentially increased the humiliation that one might expect here? And this is the king. This is the king. This is the man that was supposed to be the most powerful man in their government, and yet he's now dead, showing that they have completely conquered these people. All right, looking on to this last section of scripture here, the last two verses. So after they've taken Saul's body, it says, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burnt them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So man, this is really an interesting thing. It shows a lot of courage. They go and they're riding through the night. They go and they take a long journey. They take the bodies in the night. They come on back, and then they burn the bodies, bury the bones, and then what do they do at the end? Well, they fast for 7 days. They want to show some respect here for what has happened. What they have done here is they've basically saved the king and his sons' bodies and have treated them to a proper burial. And this is one of those things that if you haven't been in this situation, you can only imagine it. We have known people, and maybe you've known this too, but maybe you've known somebody that they've had a loved one that has passed away, and they've passed away in such a way that nobody finds the body. We've known of people that have drowned, and you just no way to find the body. And so that's a sad thing, right? You're thinking, well, you don't get to bury them, you don't get to do anything. Well, this is the respect that they give Saul. Some people might go, well, we lost that one. They've got the bodies. What are we going to do about it? Well, now they go, no, we're going to pay our last respects here for a king. Now, no matter what we feel about Saul, no matter what they felt about Saul, he was still the king. That's the big problem that we have even in our society. And of course, even in recent weeks, having someone attempt to assassinate a presidential candidate, and so just a terrible thing. And throughout time, we've had people that have actually attempted and completed assassinations on presidents and other people that are high up in our government. And listen, that is not a place for us. It's not a place for a Christian to be. Not really a place for a Christian to glory, because throughout all things, we're to give our kings, our president, respect. All right, let's make some application as we close out our thoughts. Number one is this, and I think people want to try to justify this, but I'm not going to try to justify this. If you disagree with this at all, that's fine. The truth of the matter still remains. And, if you think that something different has happened, then by all means you can explain that. But Saul committed suicide, and suicide is not justified in the Scriptures. There's all kinds of things that we could say about this. I think, number one, Saul, of course, he's going to die. God has said that he's going to die, and he could have died like a man. He could have died fighting, but no, he dies like just a scaredy cat. There's something to say about that. Revelation 21, verse 8, we see a list of sins that is mentioned. And the very first one, the very first thing that is mentioned in that list, do you remember what it is? There's a list of sins there. We oftentimes, I remember as kids, jokingly, kids would, take up the song and sing Revelation 21:8, and they would sing "Liars Go to Hell," and that was just kind of a joking little song that people would sing. While the truth remains, that is true. That's what that passage is talking about. But there's a list of things there. It's not just liars. There's a list of things. And the very first one says what? And the cowardly. And the cowardly. Do you think that this was a cowardly thing to do? Absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely was. And so the cowardly. Now, all that being considered, let's look at suicide in the Scriptures. Let me explain what this is. When you think about it, in the Bible, we have a command in the Old Testament that has remained today. This is a moral law. And in Exodus 20, verse 13, it says, "Thou shalt not kill." Now, this is the idea of murder. You don't commit murder. If anybody wants to go hunting and they kill an animal, this is not in the same regard. Butchers are not condemned to hell because they have killed animals and butchered them. That's not the thought process. This is the idea of taking an innocent human life. Why do we say it like that? Because there are times when capital punishment should be given. And we see that in the Bible. We see that several times. We see it both in concept and we see it played out. But what is suicide then? You see, "Thou shalt not murder," but suicide, at its basest point, is self-murder. If we can look at it like that, if we can see it like that, it becomes very clear. You're not supposed to do that. There's several reasons why. We are commanded to love ourselves. We're commanded to love other people as we love ourselves. And so if we don't have a concept of loving ourselves, we can't love other people. And let's look at some passages here. In Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, it says, "Thou shalt not take vengeance or bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am Jehovah." And so love your neighbor as yourself. Do you love yourself? You should love yourself. You should want to take care of yourself. You shouldn't want to hurt yourself, right? And so love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew 22, verse 39, "The second like unto this is, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself," repeating the same concept. In Ephesians 5, and verse 29, it says, "For no man ever hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as Christ also the church." And so we try to take care of ourselves. We nourish ourselves. We're going to, if we're hungry, we feed ourselves, right? If we hurt, we try to heal ourselves. That's what a normal human being does. That's what we do when we are, especially, the Christian's going to have this mindset in and of themselves. Well, think about this. Not only are we supposed to love ourselves and we're supposed to love our neighbor, But if we were to commit suicide, that act alone is not showing love for other people. In Matthew 7 and verse 12, it says, "All things, therefore, whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, even so do ye also unto them, for this is law and the prophets." And so we're supposed to do unto others as we would have things done unto us. We're supposed to, want to treat people the way that we want to be treated. Now, if you are, in this thought process, should you want to kill yourself? Well, if the opposite, is supposed to be true, in this thought process, you're supposed to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, what would that then therefore necessitate? Meaning that then, okay, listen, I want to hurt other people. I want to kill other people. Well, that's clearly wrong. When these two things are equated in the Scripture, it means that you cannot take one and impose it outside of this, for another concept here. So, like, for instance, you cannot kill somebody else. That's wrong. Well, the same should be true towards yourself. You should not kill yourself, because that is self-murder. It's murder for killing somebody else. It's also murder for yourself. If you're going to love your neighbor, you should love yourself. If it's wrong to hate your neighbor, it's wrong to hate yourself. These things coincide together. And so that's, I think, a very important point that we need to make. I think there's probably a lot of questions that come along with the thought of suicide, and I think that there's a lot of question when it comes to the thought of the mental capabilities of a person in this scenario. But the basic point here is we're not supposed to kill anybody, and that includes ourselves. And so suicide is not an answer. And I know that there's been a lot of push for this in recent years, that, listen, if you are in need of some help in this regard, then you need to talk to somebody. And I'd even be glad to talk to you if you are ever in this regard. The average Christian should not be ever in this boat, because we have something so great in the fact that the Lord sent His Son to die for us so that we could have forgiveness of sins and have a home of heaven one day. And so we don't have to have a mindset that would even put us in this position. But ultimately, if you need it, seek help. The next thing I want to mention is this. I want to think about the respect for the king that they had. There was two aspects of this as I consider it. One is, think about the armor bearer. What does the armor bearer do? Well, Saul says, "Here, let me, you just kill me." And the armor bearer says, "No, I can't do that. This is the king. I'm not going to kill the king. I'm not going to do that." And then second, we have a respect for the king, in that these valiant men came and they took Saul and his son's body, and then they disposed of them in a better manner. So, considering those things, I want to ask you another question. Now, do you think all of these men knew who Saul was? Yeah. Do you think that they knew what kind of a mentality he had? I'm pretty sure that was out there as far as, everything we've discussed. People knew who Saul was, what kind of a person he was in general. You don't have to know someone personally for word to get around about that. And of course, you think about David, just him in himself. He was the number one man in Jerusalem. He was the guy that everybody looked to. He was winning battles. He had done nothing to Saul, and yet what has Saul done to him? He's kicked him out, basically. He's gone and he's chased him around trying to kill him, and does this unsuccessfully. People realize that this is going on. The enemies are even talking about it. Now, all that being said, is Saul worthy of respect in and of himself? No, Saul is not worthy of respect. He's not a respectful person. But there's something very specific about Saul that everybody should respect. And that is what? His position. He's the king. Now listen, okay? Political things aside here, I don't care where you stand on this. I tell you, it is hard to listen to a president who cannot formulate a sentence, okay? That's hard. It is very cringeworthy. You know, there are lots of little news stories where everybody wants to point to these things. And, you know, listen, I know lots of people go, well, that's not my president. I didn't vote for him. Oh, no, you listen, I didn't either, but that's my president. Whether I like it or not. And that position holds a certain amount of respect that we should give. Now, you know, listen, if you want to throw a party the day that a new president comes into office, by all means, do your thing. But we're going to respect whoever is in that position just based on that position. Furthermore, let's take a spiritual standpoint on this. What about our spiritual leaders? You know, we need to be thinking much in the same regard to our spiritual leaders. You know, thinking about, you know, of course, when it comes down to it, if somebody's in sin, if somebody's doing something wrong, then yeah, that makes this a little bit of a different story. But by and large, we should be respecting our elders, caring for them because they are taking care of our souls. There may be some differences that we may have, maybe a slight difference in teaching or maybe a difference in personality or something like that to where, you know, we're not as close as we might want to be with certain people. But there's still a great deal of respect that is involved here when you have elders. So we need to respect our elders. We need to respect them because they are in a position of authority based on the Scriptures. And so I think that there's some good application here from this. I'm looking forward to next week because we're going to start on into 2 Samuel. And of course, I know I've been chomping at the bit for that. But I want to end with this. You know, we hardly come together without giving an opportunity for someone to obey the gospel. And I look out here, and while I see a lot of people who have already obeyed the gospel, there may be a few here that I don't realize have not done that. And you have the opportunity now to hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. And then for those of us who've already done that, after we've been baptized, we have to live faithfully. Revelation 2 and verse 10, be thou faithful unto death, and thou shalt receive a crown of life. This invitation is yours. If you need it, please come as we stand as we sing.
Softly and tenderly